The suitcase hit the porch with a hollow thud that I felt in my chest before I even saw it. Cold November wind cut through my jacket as I climbed out of my truck, still holding the prescription bottle for my doctor's visit. The locks on my own front door had been changed. I knew because my key wouldn't turn, and because Shailene's voice came sharp through the wood. "You were never part of this family, Ellis." I stood there, 63 years old, hands shaking, staring at my belongings thrown out like garbage. My stepson Colby appeared in the window, looked right at me, then pulled the curtain closed. No explanation. No warning. Just exile from the home I'd lived in for 8 years, the home my late wife Marianne had shared with me. I bent down slowly, my knees protesting, and picked up the suitcase. That's when I saw it. A manila folder tucked underneath, mud-stained at the corner. They hadn't even bothered to look inside. I slipped it under my arm, turned my back on that locked door, and walked to my truck. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady now. Something in me had gone very, very quiet. My name is Ellis Granger, and I used to believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. That was my mistake. I'm 63, a retired insurance adjuster from a small town in Kansas where everyone knows your business before you do. I kept my head down, paid my taxes early, and never caused trouble. Marianne used to say I was too forgiving for my own good. She'd laugh when she said it, touching my cheek with flour-dusted fingers while she baked. When she died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer that came fast and mean, I thought keeping her son safe was the last thing I could do for her. Colby had nowhere to go after his divorce, and Shailene, his new wife, had expensive tastes and no job. So I opened my door. I opened my wallet. I opened my life to them because Marianne would have wanted that. But sitting in my truck outside a gas station that night, engine running to keep warm, I realized something cold and true. Marianne wouldn't have wanted this. She wouldn't have wanted me erased, humiliated, thrown away. I opened the folder with stiff fingers. Inside were papers I'd forgotten I had. Legal papers. The kind that change everything. The first time Shailene called me the tenant, I was bringing in groceries. She was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing with someone, her voice bright and cruel. "Oh, the tenant's back," she said, not even lowering her tone. "Ellis." "Yeah, he still lives here. For now." I set the bags down quietly, milk and bread and eggs, and pretended I hadn't heard. But I had. The word stuck to me like grease. Colby was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone, and he smirked, didn't defend me, didn't say a word. That night, I ate dinner alone in my bedroom while they laughed downstairs, their voices carrying up through the heating vents. I told myself it was a bad joke, that Shailene was just thoughtless, that things would get better. But they didn't. The humiliations came in small doses after that. Notes left on the counter about cleanliness standards. My mail opened before I got to it. My chair at the dinner table quietly removed one Sunday, replaced with a decorative plant. I was being erased one piece at a time, and I let it happen because I was too tired, too grief-stricken, too damn polite. 3 weeks before the suitcase, Shailene held a wine glass at a small dinner party and said it out loud for everyone to hear. "You're not real family, Ellis. You were just a +1. She tilted her head like it was a clever observation, like she'd just shared a recipe. The guests, neighbors I'd known for years, went silent. Forks paused midair. Someone coughed. I stood up from the couch where I'd been sitting, excused myself, and walked outside. The night air was sharp and clean. I could hear them inside, the conversation picking back up, awkward laughter covering the moment. Nobody followed me. Nobody said her name with disappointment. Nobody defended the man who'd paid for the wine she was drinking. I stayed outside until the guests left, watching cars pull away one by one, headlights sweeping the driveway. When I came back in, Shailene was loading the dishwasher, humming. Colby was on the couch, remote in hand. Neither of them looked at me. I went to bed that night knowing something had broken that couldn't be fixed. But I didn't know yet what I was going to do about it. I just knew I was tired of disappearing. That night, alone in the gas station parking lot with the folder open on my lap, I read the trust deed Marianne had amended 6 months before she died. I'd forgotten about it in the fog of grief and caregiving. But there it was, legal and notarized, giving me sole control of the house with a trigger clause. If I was ever removed under hostile conditions, the property reverted entirely to my name, bypassing any claims Colby might think he had. Marianne had been sharper than I gave her credit for. She'd seen something in her son I'd been too kind to notice. The lawyer's notes were clipped to the back. Client expressed concern about son's financial irresponsibility, wants to protect Ellis. My throat tightened reading that. She'd protected me even from the grave. I hadn't used it. I'd wanted peace, wanted to honor her memory by keeping her son close. But now, staring at those words under the dome light of my truck, I realized peace was just another word for surrender. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the folder, and started the engine. I'd changed my mind about a lot of things in the last hour. Mercy was one of them. 2 months before the suitcase, I'd been standing in the hallway when I heard Shailene whisper to Colby in the kitchen. "Once he's gone, we'll finally have our house." Her voice was low and eager, like she was talking about a vacation. I froze, holding Marianne's old coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle she'd never let me throw away. Colby's response was quieter, but I caught it. "He won't leave, he's too attached." Shailene laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Then we make him leave." I set the mug down on the hall table and walked back to my room as quietly as I'd come. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it was trying to crack my ribs open. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to their voices drift upstairs. They weren't waiting for me to die or move on naturally. They were planning, strategizing. I was an obstacle, and they were solving me like a math problem. I thought about Marianne, about how she used to defend Colby even when he didn't deserve it, and I wondered if she'd known deep down what he was capable of. Colby had been in trouble before. The year after Marianne died, he'd defaulted on a credit card, something about a failed business idea and promises that didn't pan out. He'd come to me, voice low and ashamed, asking for help. I'd paid it off. $12,000 I didn't have to spare, money I'd been saving for a trip Marianne and I never got to take. I didn't tell anyone, didn't hold it over his head. I thought I was being kind, thought I was stepping up the way Marianne would have wanted. But looking back now, sitting in a motel room with peeling wallpaper and a vending machine humming in the hallway, I saw the pattern. He never needed a father, he needed a wallet. And I'd been too eager to fill that role. Shailene knew about the money. I'd overheard her mention it once mockingly to a friend on the phone. Ellis bailed him out like some kind of hero. The word hero dripped with sarcasm. I'd been proud of helping him. Now I understood I'd just been useful. Once the usefulness ran out, so did I. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me clear-headed. Angry men make mistakes. Clear-headed men make plans. A month before the suitcase, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find my bedroom door gone. Just gone, hinges and all. Shailene was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. "Air circulation," she said without looking up. The house was getting stuffy. My clothes were still in the closet, my bed still made, but the door was leaning against the garage wall like trash waiting for pickup. I stood in the doorway that wasn't a doorway anymore and felt something crack inside me. Not loud, just a hairline fracture in whatever had been holding me together. My photos were boxed up in the corner, Marianne's face smiling up from the cardboard. "Decluttering," Shailene had said when I asked, "makes the space feel bigger." That night, I slept in my truck outside the gas station for the first time. The seat reclined just enough to be uncomfortable, and the streetlight buzzed like a dying fly. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back in the morning and talk to Colby, that we'd fix this. But I didn't go back. I sat in that truck, cold and stiff, and realized I'd been sleeping in a house that wasn't mine for months. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Inside the folder, beneath the trust deed, was an envelope I'd never opened. My name was written on the front in Marianne's handwriting, shaky from the medication but unmistakably hers. I opened it carefully, hands trembling, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. "Ellis," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm already gone, and I hope you're okay. I know Colby can be difficult. I know he carries bitterness I never understood. But I trust you to do what's right, not what's easy. If they ever forget who you are, remind them who built that house. Remind them what love looks like when it's real. I'm sorry I can't be there to do it myself. Love, always, Marianne. I read it 3 times, sitting in that motel room with the curtains pulled tight. She'd known, maybe not the details, but the shape of it. She'd known her son might hurt me, and she'd left me a way out. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it on the nightstand. Then I picked up my phone and called the lawyer who'd helped draft the trust. His voice was familiar, warm. "Ellis Granger," he said. "I wondered when I'd hear from you." The lawyer's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a dollar store. The kind of place that didn't look like much but got the job done. His name was Franklin, and he remembered me the second I walked in. "You're the only client I ever saw cry signing a trust document," he said, shaking my hand. I didn't remember crying, but I believed him. We sat across from each other in his cramped office, papers spread between us like a map. "You want to activate the clause," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "They threw me out, changed the locks, my stuff's in a suitcase." Franklin leaned back, fingers steepled. "Then the house is yours. Legally, uncontestably yours. They don't have a claim." He walked me through the steps. "File the updated deed, notify the county, send formal notice to the occupants." "It'll take a few weeks," he said, "but once it's done, they're out." I asked if there was any way they could fight it. Franklin smiled, not unkindly. "Not unless they can prove you weren't removed under hostile conditions. And based on what you've told me, that's not happening." I signed the papers, feeling lighter than I had in months. Walking out into the cold, I realized I wasn't just taking back a house. I was taking back my name. Colby tried calling me 5 times that first day, then 10 the next. I watched the phone light up and didn't answer. Shailene left a voicemail, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Ellis, we're worried about you. Can you just call us back?" I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Let them worry. Let them wonder. They'd spent months making me invisible. Now I was a ghost they couldn't ignore. A week later, a letter arrived at the house. I knew because Franklin called to tell me it had been delivered. It was from the trust's estate management firm requesting access to review the property's condition. "Standard procedure," Franklin said, but enough to rattle them. I imagined Shailene's face when she opened it, the way her confidence would crack just a little. "Why do they think we don't own it?" she'd ask Colby. And he wouldn't have an answer. I stayed in the motel, working through the steps Franklin had laid out. Each day brought a new piece of the puzzle into place. Updated records, filed notices, documentation proving I'd paid the property taxes for years while Colby claimed he was handling it. Every signature felt like a nail in a coffin they'd built for themselves. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just finishing what they'd started. Franklin introduced me to an accountant named Wallace, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he belonged in a library. I brought him everything: tax receipts, bank statements, proof that I'd been covering the property costs Colby had claimed to handle. Wallace spread the papers across his desk and nodded slowly. "This is more than enough," he said. "You've got a solid case for financial misrepresentation." I asked what that meant in plain terms. Wallace smiled. "It means they lied about who was paying for the house. If they tried to claim ownership, this would bury them." I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. For months I'd been drowning in their lies, believing I was the problem. Now I had proof that I wasn't. Wallace filed the documentation with the county and sent copies to Franklin. "If they try to fight this," he said, "they'll lose. And they'll look worse for trying." I thanked him and walked out into the afternoon sun, feeling lighter than I had since Marianne died. That night, I sat in my motel room and thought about her, about the way she used to hum while folding laundry, about the quiet strength she carried even when she was sick. "It's time," I whispered to the empty room. Time to show them what that silence bought. The last holiday dinner had been a month before the suitcase. Thanksgiving. Shailene had set the table with 2 place settings, 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 wine glasses. I'd stood in the doorway, confused. "Where do I sit?" I'd asked. Shailene looked up, surprised, like she'd forgotten I existed. "Oops," she said, voice light. "Must have miscounted." She didn't get another plate. I'd eaten alone in the garage, sitting on an overturned crate, turkey sandwich on a paper towel. Through the window I could see them laughing. Colby raising his glass, Shailene leaning into him like they were celebrating something. I remembered thinking, this is it. This is the moment I should leave. But I hadn't. I'd finished my sandwich, thrown the towel away, and gone to bed. Now, sitting in the motel with the trust papers spread on the bed, I thought about that garage, that paper towel, that moment of swallowing my dignity, because it seemed easier than fighting. They'd wanted me invisible. I'd given them that. But invisible doesn't mean powerless. I picked up my phone, called Monroe, Marianne's childhood friend who'd become a real estate agent, and said, "I need your help." Her voice came back warm and certain. "It'd be my pleasure, Ellis." The property evaluator showed up unannounced on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there, but Franklin called to tell me how it went. Colby had answered the door, confused, and the evaluator had explained he was conducting an updated assessment required by the trust in case of liquidation. Colby's confidence had cracked right there on the doorstep. "What trust?" he'd asked, voice rising. The evaluator had been professional, calm. "The property trust established by Marianne Granger. Standard procedure." He'd handed Colby a business card and walked the perimeter, taking notes, snapping photos. Shailene had come outside, arms crossed, chest kept, demanding to know what was happening. The evaluator had just smiled and finished his work. By the time he left, they were standing in the driveway, staring at each other with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you don't know as much as you thought you did. Franklin said Colby had called the office 3 times that afternoon, demanding answers. "I told him to consult the trust documentation," Franklin said, barely hiding his amusement. "He doesn't have it, does he?" I asked. "No," Franklin replied. "He doesn't." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The trap was closing, and they didn't even know they were inside it yet. Monroe met me at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since breakfast. She slid into the seat across from me, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. Marianne used to say Monroe could sell sand in a desert. I handed her the paperwork Franklin had prepared. "If I tell you to list it," I said, "can you do it without them knowing?" Monroe read through the documents, lips moving slightly, then looked up with a grin that reminded me why Marianne had loved her. "It'd be my pleasure," she said. "When do you want to move?" I told her to wait until the legal notices were fully processed, until there was no way for them to stop it. 2 weeks, I said. "Then list it quietly. Open house while they're out." She tapped her pen on the table, already planning. "You know this is going to cause a scene," she said. I nodded. "Good," I replied it. Monroe laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the best way. "Marianne would have loved this," she said softly. I thought about that, about whether Marianne would have approved. Then I thought about the letter, about her telling me to remind them who built the house. "Yeah," I said, "she would have." Shailene started snooping a week after the evaluator's visit. She tore through the filing cabinet in the home office, looking for the deed, the title, anything with their names on it. Colby watched from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look unconcerned. "There's nothing," Shailene said, voice tight. "No deed, no title, nothing." She looked at him, eyes wide. "Why can't we find anything?" Colby waved it off, but his hand shook. "It's just paperwork," he said. "We live here, that's what matters." Shailene wasn't convinced. She kept digging, pulling out old bills, tax notices, mortgage statements. My name was on everything. Every payment, every receipt, every official document. Her face went pale. "Colby," she said quietly, "I think we have a problem." That night, they argued. I knew because Monroe's friend, who lived 2 doors down, heard them through the walls and called to tell me. "She's saying you own the house," the friend said. "And he's saying that's impossible." I smiled into the phone, thanked her, and hung up. Let them argue. Let them tear through files and come up empty. The truth was waiting for them whether they were ready or not. And I'd waited long enough. Monroe scheduled the open house for a Saturday afternoon when Colby and Shailene had plans. I'd kept tabs through Franklin's office, through neighbors, through the quiet network of people who'd watched me get pushed out and hadn't said a word, but hadn't forgotten either. The sign went up Friday night. Open house, Saturday 1 to 4 p.m. Shailene saw it pulling into the driveway and nearly crashed the car. I parked across the street in my truck, engine off, and watched. People came. Couples, investors, a family with 2 kids. Monroe greeted them at the door, professional and warm. One of the buyers, a woman in a blue coat, asked, "Who lives here now?" Monroe's answer was perfect, delivered with a straight face. "Just squatters. Won't be long." The woman nodded, moving through the rooms, taking notes. Shailene came home early, screeching into the driveway, and stormed inside. I could see her through the window, yelling at Monroe, who stood calm as stone. Monroe handed her a card, said something I couldn't hear, and walked out. The open house continued. People toured the rooms, asked questions, made offers. Shailene stood in the living room, shaking, while strangers evaluated the furniture, the walls, the life she thought she'd stolen. I drove away before she could see me, feeling something close to peace. 2 days later, Colby's bank account got flagged. I'd submitted evidence of financial fraud to the county, false claims about property tax payments, misrepresentation on loan documents, everything Wallace had helped me compile. The freeze hit without warning. Colby tried to buy gas and his card declined. Tried the ATM, declined. He called the bank, voice rising, and they explained there was an investigation into fraudulent financial activity tied to his account. Shailene found out when her card declined at the grocery store. She came home with bags half full, face red, and started yelling before she even closed the door. "What did you do?" she screamed at Colby. "I didn't do anything," he shot back, but his voice cracked. They tore through the mail, found the notice from the fraud investigation unit, and Shailene's hands started shaking. "You said he was gone," she said, voice breaking. "You said he couldn't do anything." Colby stared at the letter, face white. "I wasn't there," but Monroe's friend called again, voice excited. "They're losing it," she said, yelling about accounts and fraud in Ellis. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the silence of my motel room. The walls were thin. I could hear a TV next door, canned laughter from some sitcom. But in my room, everything was quiet, calm. I'd spent months being their ghost. Now I was their reckoning. The foreclosure letter arrived the following Monday. It wasn't a real foreclosure. Technically, you can't foreclose on a property you don't own, but it was a notice of pending eviction due to fraudulent occupancy claims. Franklin had worded it carefully, legally airtight. Shailene crumpled the paper in her hands, standing in the kitchen, breathing hard. Colby paced, phone pressed to his ear, trying to reach someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. "I think we've been set up," Colby said finally, voice hollow. Shailene turned on him, eyes blazing. "You think?" She threw the crumpled letter at him. "What was in that folder, Colby? The one on the porch? Did you even look?" He hadn't. Of course he hadn't. He'd been too eager to watch me leave, too confident that throwing me out meant I was gone for good. They tried calling me again. I didn't answer. They tried Franklin's office. He told them to consult their own legal counsel. They didn't have any. Monroe stopped answering their calls too. By the end of the week, they were alone in a house that was slipping through their fingers. Surrounded by boxes, they'd started packing in panic, with nowhere to go and no one to blame but themselves. I drove past one evening, slow, and saw them through the window. They looked small, scared, human. I kept driving. Colby found Monroe at her office, desperate. He offered to settle the house sale directly, said they could work out a payment plan, anything to avoid losing it. Monroe leaned back in her chair, looked at him like he was a stranger, and laughed. Not cruel, just honest. "Sorry, sweetheart," she said. "I don't work for you." She picked up her phone, made it clear the conversation was over. Colby stood there, face red, fists clenched, then turned and walked out. He called me that night. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. "Ellis," he said, voice cracking. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything, just listened. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he continued. "We can fix this. Just tell me what you want." I took a breath, slow and steady. "What I want," I said, "is for you to understand something, Colby. You can't fix what you broke. You can only live with it." "That's not fair," he said, voice rising. "Fair?" I repeated. "You threw my suitcase on the porch. You changed the locks. You erased me from my own home. And now you want to talk about fair?" Silence on the other end, then quieter. "Please, Ellis, we have nowhere to go." I closed my eyes, thought about Marianne, thought about the letter. "You should have thought of that before," I said, and hung up. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. I found Colby waiting for me at the diner a week later. I'd come for coffee, same booth I always used, and there he was, sitting across from my spot like he'd been invited. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes red, hands shaking around a mug he wasn't drinking from. I sat down slowly, didn't say anything, just waited. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said again, like repetition would make it true. I sipped my coffee, let the silence stretch. He shifted, uncomfortable. "Shailene," she pushed for it. The door, the dinner, all of it. I just went along. I set my mug down carefully. "That's the thing about going too far, Colby," I said. "You never know where the line was until you've crossed it." His face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And maybe he was. Maybe sitting there, broke and desperate, he finally understood what he'd done. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't give back time. "Your mother," I said quietly, "left me that house because she knew you'd need someone to stop you from destroying yourself. I tried. You wouldn't let me." I stood up, left money for the coffee, and walked out. Behind me, I heard him start to cry. I didn't turn around. Shailene left 2 days before the final eviction notice. I heard about it from Monroe, who heard it from the neighbor. Shailene had packed her car in the middle of the night, bags stuffed in the trunk, and driven off without saying goodbye. Her parting words to Colby, shouted through the window, echoed through the quiet street. "You kicked out the one man keeping you afloat." Colby was alone after that. The house felt emptier, even from the outside. Lights stayed off. The lawn went unmowed. I drove past once and saw him sitting on the porch steps, head in his hands, looking like a man who just realized he'd bet everything on a losing hand. Part of me felt sorry for him. The smaller part. The bigger part remembered the door, the dinner, the suitcase. Franklin called to confirm the final paperwork was ready. "It's done," he said. "The house is yours, legally, officially, completely." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in my truck, staring at nothing. I'd won. But winning felt quieter than I'd expected. Less like triumph, more like the end of a long, exhausting fight. I started the engine and drove toward the house. It was time to go home. The final papers arrived at Colby's door on a Thursday morning. Notice of sale, new deed, transfer of ownership. The buyer, listed in neat print, was a shell company I'd set up with Franklin's help. Granger Holdings, LLC. Colby stared at the name, read it 3 times, and I imagined the moment it clicked. The moment he realized I'd never left. I just circled around. He called me one last time. "You bought it back," he said, voice empty. "Yes," I replied. "You're kicking me out." "No," I said. "You kicked yourself out the day you threw my suitcase on the porch. I'm just making it official." He didn't argue, didn't beg, just hung up. 2 days later, I watched him load his car, boxes stacked in the back seat, and drive away. He didn't look back. I stood in the driveway, keys in my hand, and felt the weight of it. Not victory. Not revenge. Just quiet. The house was mine again. The locks were mine. The doors, the rooms, the space Marianne and I had built together. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and breathed in the familiar smell of wood and old paint. I was home. Not because I'd fought for it, but because I'd refused to disappear. I walked through the house slowly, room by room. The living room where Shailene had mocked me, the kitchen where I'd overheard their plans, the hallway where my door used to be. I'd brought my things back in boxes, 1 carload at a time, and now I unpacked them carefully. Photos of Marianne went back on the mantel. Her favorite blanket, the one she'd crocheted in soft blues, draped over the couch. In the bedroom, I opened the suitcase they'd thrown out. Inside, beneath my clothes, was her shawl, the one she wore on cold mornings, smelling faintly of lavender and coffee. I held it to my face and let myself cry for the first time since she died. Not sad tears, grateful ones. She'd protected me, even after she was gone. She'd seen what I couldn't and left me a way out. I hung the shawl in the closet, set her photo on the nightstand, and lay down on the bed. The room was quiet. The house was quiet. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. I thought about Colby, about where he'd go, what he'd do. Part of me hoped he'd learn something. The rest of me knew that wasn't my job anymore. I'd done what Marianne asked. I'd reminded them who built the house. Now I could finally rest. Sometimes the best revenge is the kind they never see coming. That's what I thought, sitting on the porch a month later, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the yard. I'd planted new flowers along the walkway, daisies, Marianne's favorite, and they were starting to bloom. The house looked like itself again, felt like itself. Colby sent one final envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sentence on notebook paper. I understand now. No apology, no excuse, just acknowledgement. I set it on the table, didn't reply. Understanding is the first step, but it doesn't erase what was done. It just means you finally see it clearly. I made a copy of the deed, framed it, and hung it in the hallway where my door used to be. A reminder, not for them. They were gone. For me. A reminder that I'd stood up, that I'd fought back quietly, legally, completely. Marianne's letter stayed in my wallet, folded small, her handwriting a comfort I carried everywhere. They'd tried to bury me alive, tried to erase me from my own life, but they forgot something important. I'm the one who laid the foundation, and foundations don't disappear just because someone wants them to. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked back inside. The door closed softly behind me. I was home. Finally, truly home.